Hey y'all, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of this week's readings, some of the major themes, at least within this week's readings, and just to give you a sense of kind of what's going on. So I recognize that there's a lot of reading packed into one week, and I just want to pull out some of the major threads here before we try to discuss this in person. Um, so the basic question this week is kind of about access to healthcare and whether or not you have a right to healthcare. And this question in terms of justice brings uh, forth sort of a standard debate between sort of individual liberty and the equality of citizens. So, in general, people who are sort of focused on liberty believe that the state should, as much as possible, avoid interfering with individual liberty because, again, this is like the autonomy debate. Liberty is really, really important. Um, and then, sort of similarly, there's people who think that equality is really, really important, and this is mirrored with our thinking about utilitarianism and well-being. So the thinking is that the state should ensure that citizens are treated fairly and have equal access to some social goods, and furthermore, the belief is that um, we should do what we can to raise well-being and to make sure people, um, when there are big inequalities of well-being, to do what we can to try to sort of equalize that. So when it comes to sort of thinking about sort of healthcare, there are liberty concerns, right? There are concerns about how we pay for it. So taxing folks in order to pay for expensive healthcare treatments, and making other people sort of pay for other people's healthcare is going to be sort of an issue of liberty. Um, there's a lot of discussion of the Affordable Care Act in this week's readings, although it's a bit dated. But one of the aspects of the Affordable Care Act as a way to sort of pay for things is to make people buy health insurance, right? So this is seen to be people as sort of an infringement on liberty. Uh, and then similarly, anything that gets in the way of sort of free market uh, functioning or private property or private enterprise will also be considered, at least by some, as to be sort of an infringement on liberty. So again, insofar as liberty and autonomy are important, anything that sort of undermines these things is going to be sort of a problematic. Um, so on the other hand, though, there are concerns about inequality that, and in particular, how it sort of plays out in our thinking about sort of health and access to healthcare. So I think it can kind of go without saying, but we'll say it anyway, that poor health can lead to unhappiness and to poor life outcomes. And so we can, we worry about sort of just the unequal well-being of citizens, right? So some citizens are doing really well and are very healthy and live relatively happy lives as a part of that healthiness, and then other people are doing sort of very poorly and have their lives in some cases cut very short as a result of poor health. Um, and then to go along with that is a lot of this sort of argument that at least is being covered by Daniels has to do with sort of inequality of opportunity. So part of having sort of poor health is that you have fewer opportunities. Um, to do what you want sort of with your life. So again, the sort of the healthier folk are at an advantage, and the unhealthier folk are at a disadvantage. Um, so moving on, then let's talk about some arguments for why we might want to say that people should be provided with access to health care by the state, or reasons why, or arguments why the state shouldn't be providing these things. So to start with, we'll start with sort of a positive argument. This is the argument that the state should provide health care to its citizens, and this is sort of based on the equality of opportunity thinking. So we'll just sort of state at the outset here that you might believe that equality of well-being is not really sort of the business of the state, that the state is not here to sort of to ensure certain equal outcomes, uh, but what we might want to say is that everybody should have sort of equal opportunity um, to pursue a life of their choosing. So it might not result in equal happiness, but they should be at least given an opportunity to sort of direct their lives as they sort of see fit. So equal opportunity is the driving force. And then what comes along with this way of thinking is that people shouldn't be sort of disadvantaged at the outset, right? They shouldn't be disadvantaged for things that are outside of their control, right? So if people make sort of bad choices or autonomously choose a life that's kind of crappy, then that's okay, but they shouldn't be sort of penalized for things that are outside of their control, right? So that's unfair. And so the thinking is that people should have sort of fair equality of opportunity. And from that, you get this sort of general argument, and this is kind of what the Daniels argument would look like in a very sort of simple form, um, is that citizens have a right to fair equality of opportunity. And then, you got to connect this idea to sort of healthcare. So something like citizens will have fair equality of opportunity only if they have adequate health care or access to adequate health care. And therefore, citizens have a right to adequate sort of health care. So that's kind of the general argument, and then you sort of add to that sort of a few things to get to state-run governments. So you need, or excuse me, state-run healthcare or state-insured healthcare. So you'd have to say something, and this is kind of what the Presidential Commission paper was saying, but you'd have to say something that sort of just traditional kind of free market forces will not sort of adequately provide those opportunities for healthcare, that people will be sort of priced out of healthcare, will be unable to sort of afford it, given certain realities, and therefore it would be sort of incumbent upon the state to provide those things. But anyway, those are sort of more moves, and as we'll see, those moves are not without controversy and not without disagreement. But nevertheless, this is kind of just the general argument, the general thing that you'll be thinking. Now, it is the case that Daniels gets into this distinction between enhancement and treatment, and we will talk about that here briefly at the end of this video. But for now, this is just kind of the basic argument behind this idea that people have a right to health care. Okay, so before moving on, just bear in mind that when it comes to right talk, very few people believe that that rights are absolute. So there may be situations in which other considerations are just as important or sort of more important, and thus this right may be sort of overturned. Or at least in some situations, right, not respected. And then the other thing to sort of bear in mind is that adequate health care is kind of what we're sort of shooting for here, and not sort of preferred health care. So people have a right to sort of a sufficient amount of health care, as opposed to people have a right to whatever kind of health care treatments they want. So this is something my wife, who as a physician has to sort of struggle with, is that people who come in who want treatments that are unnecessary, or in some cases actively sort of um, inimical to well-being. She has to kind of explain to people that she's not here to just give you what you want. She's here to provide you with sort of what you need. So there's a distinction that is also not without controversy, but something that comes up in a lot of these discussions. All right, moving on. Again, just trying to do this as quickly as possible. I want to talk about the libertarian kind of view here, and this is exemplified by the Sade reading. So libertarians, which is in the name, right, put sort of most of their weight on sort of liberty. They're very much don't interfere with people, and don't make people do things that they don't want to do. Um, and so libertarians, when they talk about rights, tend to be more interested in sort of the negative rights, the sort of hands-off kind of idea that the government should not do things, as opposed to the positive rights, which is more the government should sort of provide things. So again, libertarians tend to think that the negative rights in general sort of outweigh positive rights, and equal access to healthcare would be a positive right, right? It would entail sort of giving somebody something while at the same time interfering with people's liberty, because well, for a number of reasons, and I'll just kind of enumerate a few of them here. So one thing libertarians, or at least SADE, is kind of focuses on is that citizens give unequal weight to the value of healthcare. So some people care about it very much, some people don't, and having sort of the government get involved in things amounts to kind of taking a side, uh, which is controversial. Similarly, libertarians, or at least say it again, will focus on the aspects of poor health that are under people's control. That the sedentary lifestyles that people decide to engage in, or the foods and diets that people autonomously sort of choose to eat. A lot of the health problems that uh, you know come out of being sedentary, that come out of eating poorly, they would say are their responsibility, right? So it's not up to the government to rectify those inequalities, because they are under people's control. Another big theme in libertarians and SAID is that healthcare systems are very wasteful and inefficient, and that state-run healthcare systems are even more wasteful and inefficient. And so we'd actually sort of be better off, everybody would be better off, and you wouldn't have to infringe on anyone's liberty to sort of do this, would be to deregulate the healthcare industry. Um, and of course, along with that comes with that sort of a healthy respect for private enterprise and private property, and just sort of market systems generally, right? The thought is that they're much more inefficient, they're much less likely to interfere with personal liberty, and so it's sort of, you get the best of both worlds in some very optimistic readings, which is that you don't interfere with liberty, and you bring about sort of the optimal health outcomes. Okay, so moving on to some of the other readings. Here's the Menzel paper is kind of an interesting argument. Not really talking about a right to healthcare in the sense that we have to provide an equal opportunity to everybody, but more just kind of looking at sort of the cultural underpinnings, at least in the United States, right? So the thinking is that the people in the United States already kind of incoherently um, affirm a right to healthcare, and from this we can get to some of the more actionable things that we see, like with the Affordable Care Act, like a health mandate or a insurance mandate, and so on and so forth. Um, so this argument is kind of based in this kind of one legal uh, piece of data, or datum, I should say, which is the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which says that people cannot be denied emergency care. So from this, Menzel sort of argues that we should think of healthcare as a public good, and and without sort of going into too much detail here, he argues that there should be sort of like Daniels, there should be sort of a basic healthcare package that everybody gets. So again, not universal in the sense that everybody gets whatever they want, or everybody gets the best treatment, but that everybody is deserving of some sort of sufficient amount of health care. All right, a couple other things. So a couple of the later readings here get into an interesting sort of rediscussion of equality of opportunity. And the Kawachi piece kind of goes into the other factors that result in inequalities of well-being, like health, right, and opportunity, that are not based in sort of unequal access to healthcare. So what we see just from the empirical data is that even with countries that have equal access to healthcare, you still have these big gaps in well-being and opportunity, right? So the richer folk are still living longer, right? They're still doing better, and they still have more opportunity um, than the poorer folks. So the more inequality that we allow in these sort of other areas, we still see these inequalities of outcomes sort of playing out. So the Srinivasan piece kind of sort of gets into that, saying, well, look, um, by providing universal health care, we might actually be doing sort of too little, to address sort of the underlying problem of inequality of inequality of opportunity and inequality of well-being. And so take that along with this idea that it's really, really expensive, or can be really, really expensive to provide equality of access to healthcare, that it might actually be too inefficient of a goal, right? Our goal may be better served if our goal is, equalizing opportunity and health. We may be better served in using that money, if we are going to use this money for anything. We might be better served for using it in other places like education or labor control, or just sort of general redistribution of wealth. Um, so again, may turn out to be sort of more efficient, and so gives reason maybe to not focus our attention on providing universal health care. It should be noted here that Srinivasan is not a libertarian, right? Srinivasan isn't worried about taxing people too much, or interfering with private property. Srinivasan just wants to do it, to address the problem in the most efficient way, right? So people should have equality of opportunity, but we might better get that through a different means. So they're not on the same page with the libertarians. Okay, I just wanted to end here then with this sort of side debate that is more focused on the minutia of someone's argument, which is this Daniels versus sort of Allen thing. So in part of Daniels' argument, he makes this distinction between treatment and enhancement, that the idea is that people, in terms of getting adequate health care, have a right to treatment for sort of a disability or disease, but not to the use of medical resources for enhancement, right? To sort of somehow put themselves sort of above where they sort of normally were, right? So they were functioning well enough, but want to sort of be enhanced. So Daniel says, well, that you don't have a right to that sort of enhancement. And then Allen comes along and argues that, well, that distinction sort of falls apart. And then Daniel sort of responds to Allen. So I just want to briefly kind of just talk about sort of the Allen argument, that his concern with the distinction, and we'll just sort of leave it at that. So Allen uses this interesting kind of real world case where there's the difference between an individual's short stature being a result of just sort of a unlucky genetic lottery, so just having sort of short parents, for example, and then somebody having short stature as a result of growth hormone deficiency. And the way that he reads Daniels, and I think Daniels sort of more or less agrees, but the way he reads Daniels is that that in the former case, the being short because of short parents, then seeking growth hormone treatment would be enhancement, right? And so would be something that you wouldn't have a right to. But in the case of the growth hormone deficiency, seeking treatment would be treatment, right? Which is something that you do have a right to. But Daniels thinks that, well, that doesn't make sense, right? It seems like for both folk, their short stature would have sort of the same impact on their opportunities going forward. And furthermore, they're just as not responsible for that situation as the other, right? So this equality of opportunity stuff comes a lot with sort of, well, are you responsible for the situation that you find yourself? And it seems fair to say that neither of these individuals are responsible for their shortness, right? Nobody took some sort of hormone blocking thing autonomously, right? It was equally unlucky. So if that's the case, it seems like there's a problem with this distinction, and might sort of present a problem for Daniels. So it's up to Daniels or somebody who wants to continue defending this distinction to say something about this case. All right. Well, that's going to be it for now. Just wanted to give you, a brief overview, and I'm already sort of getting close to the 25-minute mark here, so it's not as brief as I wanted it to be. But hopefully you get sort of more of a sense of this 60 some odd pages of reading, and more of a sense of what you want to talk about when we get together.